They say a dog's loyalty can save a life. But what if that loyalty is mistaken for danger? Would you risk losing your child's protector just because of fear or appearances? Tonight's story from Vale Marks will leave you questioning everything you think you know about instinct, trust, and second chances. Some people believe pit bulls are born dangerous. Others say it's how they're raised. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but stay until the very end, because this isn't just a story. It's a powerful lesson wrapped in fur and silence. A reminder that sometimes the hero doesn't bark until it's too late. Willow Creek was the kind of town people dreamed of retiring to, a place where time slowed just enough to let the seasons breathe. Tree-lined streets curled gently around old Victorian homes, their porches creaking with every breeze that stirred the wind chimes. Mailboxes were hand-painted. The local diner still offered pie on the house if you were celebrating a birthday. It was, by all appearances, a safe haven. And for Evan and Rachel Dawson, that was precisely the point. After years in the city, where sirens often outnumbered lullabies and sunlight came filtered through high-rise shadows, the Dawsons were ready for quiet. Their daughter Lily had come into the world just 7 weeks ago, pink-cheeked, soft, and impossibly small. She had changed everything. Suddenly, life's noise faded into the background. It was no longer about deadlines or dinner reservations. It was about her. Evan had always pictured raising a family somewhere like Willow Creek, a place with sidewalks wide enough for strollers and neighbors who waved just because. When he found the listing for the old 2-story farmhouse on Maple Drive, nestled between a willow tree and a rusted red mailbox, he knew. This was it. And it would have been perfect, if not for the undercurrent Rachel couldn't ignore. The house itself had charm, no doubt. Hardwood floors worn smooth with time, a fireplace in the living room that smelled faintly of cedar, and the kind of front porch that begged for rocking chairs and summer lemonade. But there was something else. Something Rachel couldn't quite name. A weight in the air. A silence too deep. Maybe it was the way the floorboards creaked at night, not from footsteps, but as if responding to something unseen. Or maybe it was the way Lily's baby monitor sometimes picked up a soft, static-filled hum, like a whisper that never quite formed. Rachel told herself she was just adjusting. New mother nerves, as people like to say. But the unease didn't fade. Moose was part of the family, too, though not entirely by Rachel's choice. A 3-year-old brindle pit bull with soulful eyes and a scar down his left foreleg, Moose had come into Evan's life after a warehouse fire 2 winters ago. Evan had been volunteering at a local shelter that night, dropping off supplies, when the alarms went off. He remembered the smoke, the chaos, and then the frightened whimpering from inside the building. Moose had been trapped in a supply closet, eyes wide and body trembling. Evan carried him out, wrapped in his jacket. From that day on, Moose had never left his side. To Evan, Moose was more than a pet. He was a survivor, a symbol of loyalty and trust. But Rachel had grown up differently. Her childhood memory of dogs was not of comfort or warmth, but of fear. She had been 5 when a neighbor's German shepherd lunged at her without warning, leaving a small scar on her shoulder and a permanent wariness in her heart. And while she had long since forgiven dogs in general, large breeds, especially pit bulls, still triggered something in her. She had tried, in the beginning, to make it work. Moose was calm, she had to admit that. He never barked unnecessarily, never showed signs of aggression. Around Evan, he was obedient and affectionate. But it was his behavior around Lily that stirred something uneasy in Rachel. In the first week after the move, she started noticing things. Moose would sit outside Lily's nursery, ears perked, eyes fixed on the crib. He didn't growl, but his body remained tense, too tense for Rachel's comfort. Once, in the early hours of morning, She found him standing perfectly still outside the closed nursery door, staring down at the floor as if listening for something deep beneath the house. Evan brushed it off. "He's just watching over her," he said, ruffling Moose's head. "He knows she's part of our pack." But to Rachel, it didn't feel like watching. It felt like warning. Moose had also started whimpering at night, not loudly, but enough to rouse Rachel from sleep. When she checked the baby monitor, everything seemed fine. Lily was swaddled, breathing gently, surrounded by the soft glow of the nightlight shaped like a star. Yet Moose would continue to pace near the nursery door, nose to the floor, emitting those low, restless sounds. It wasn't the kind of whimpering she associated with hunger or boredom. It felt more instinctual. Rachel tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just adjusting to the new house like they were. Maybe there were squirrels in the attic or old pipes groaning in protest. But the feeling of being watched crept into her spine. And Moose wasn't just looking at Lily. He was looking at the floorboards. She began to avoid being alone with him, especially when holding Lily. Moose would approach gently, tail wagging low, but Rachel would stiffen every time. Evan noticed, of course, but didn't press it. He was trying to be patient, trying to bridge the growing emotional distance in their little household. "I just don't want to take any chances," Rachel confessed one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's so small, so defenseless." Evan didn't argue, but the silence between them spoke volumes. Outside, the wind rustled the willow branches. Inside, the baby monitor hummed steadily. Moose lay near the nursery door, head resting on his paws, eyes still trained on the floor as if waiting, watching, listening. Something wasn't right. Rachel could feel it. But the question that haunted her wasn't about what Moose might do. It was about what Moose already knew. The nights in Willow Creek grew quieter as winter crept closer. But inside the Dawson house, Rachel's restlessness only deepened. It began with faint sounds. At first, she thought they were tricks of the wind or her own overactive mind, nothing more than the house settling into its old bones. But the noises didn't go away. They became more distinct, more deliberate. A low rumble, a soft scrape, and always, always, from the same place. Lily's room. One night, Rachel paused outside the nursery, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She had heard it again, the subtle rhythmic scratching from within. When she pushed the door open, Lily was asleep in her crib, bathed in the dim golden light of the star-shaped nightlight. But Moose was there too, standing beside the crib, utterly still, his gaze fixed downward. "Moose?" she whispered. He didn't react at first. His ears were up, his brow furrowed, and his nose pointed toward the hardwood floor beneath the crib. Then slowly, he turned to look at her, letting out the faintest growl, not directed at her but at something else, something below. Rachel's heart pounded. She backed out of the room and closed the door gently behind her, her mind racing. She wanted to believe Moose was just being protective. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like he was waiting, or warning. She told Evan about the growl the next morning, about the sounds beneath the floor and Moose's strange behavior. He listened carefully, but when she finished, he simply shook his head. "Moose doesn't growl," Evan said. "Not unless he's scared or hurt. He's not aggressive, Rach. You know that." She did know that, logically, but logic didn't quiet the pit in her stomach. "What if it's instinct?" she offered. "What if he's trying to dominate Lily? Dogs sometimes do that. They get possessive." Evan frowned. "Moose isn't like that. He's never been like that." But Rachel couldn't shake the unease. The noises were too consistent, Moose's posture too rigid. Every time she passed Lily's room, she saw Moose stationed there, ears up, body alert, not relaxed like a companion, but taut like a sentinel. And then came the footage. They had installed a baby monitor with a camera shortly after moving in, more for peace of mind than necessity. That night, Rachel stayed up long after Evan had gone to bed, replaying the recent recordings. At first, everything looked normal. Lily sleeping, the nightlight flickering softly, the occasional creak of the house, but then Moose appeared in the frame. He entered the nursery slowly, his head low, steps careful. He made no noise, but Rachel could almost feel the tension in his body through the screen. He approached the crib and sat beside it, eyes locked on the floor just beneath Lily. Then he growled, quietly, almost mournfully. Rachel's breath caught. The growl wasn't loud or angry. It was almost as if he were pleading. But to Rachel, it didn't matter. It confirmed what she feared. Moose was fixated on Lily. Even if he hadn't done anything overtly threatening, the intensity of his focus made her blood run cold. She showed Evan the footage the next morning. He leaned over her shoulder, watching intently. When the growl came, he sat back with a heavy sigh. "He's not growling at her," Evan said softly. "It's like he's listening." "To what?" Rachel pressed. "There's nothing there, Evan. Nothing but a baby in her crib." "Exactly. And Moose is protecting her." But Rachel had already made up her mind. The patterns were too consistent, and Moose's behavior too unsettling to ignore. He hovered near Lily like a shadow, always silent, always alert, always watching. "I think we need to move him out of the house," she said finally, "at least for now, just until Lily's a little older." Evan stared at her, his expression a complicated mixture of hurt and concern. "You want to banish him after everything?" "I'm not banishing him," Rachel said, though her voice wavered. I need to feel safe. Moose is unpredictable right now. He's acting like something's wrong, but we don't know what. And I can't take that risk, not with Lily." They argued for nearly an hour, the discussion winding through worry and guilt and defensiveness. Evan didn't want to give in, but Rachel was firm. Her fear wasn't just rooted in past trauma. It was rooted in the present, in what she could see and hear and feel. The unease in her chest every time Moose stared at the crib. The sounds under the floor. The growls that sounded too intentional to be dismissed. Eventually, Evan agreed. Reluctantly. That evening, he set up a bed for Moose on the screened-in back porch, where the dog could still see inside through the glass door. Moose didn't resist. He simply lay down, curling into himself with a soft whine, his eyes watching the nursery window. Rachel closed the door behind him, but the guilt followed her into the house. She told herself it was temporary. A few days? Maybe a week? Just until the sounds stopped, just until her nerves settled. But in the stillness of the night, with Lily asleep and Moose no longer pacing outside her room, the silence felt heavier than ever. Like something had been removed that shouldn't have been. Moose didn't bark. He didn't claw at the door. He just waited. Quiet. Constant. And still. Somehow. Listening. Rachel wanted to believe she had made the right decision. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just silenced the only one who had known all along that something was terribly wrong. The first few nights after Moose was moved to the back porch passed in a kind of uneasy silence. The house, once filled with the soft thump of his footsteps and the quiet hum of his presence, now felt too still. Rachel told herself the calm was a good thing. No more low growling outside the nursery. No more pacing or whimpering at odd hours. Just peace. But it wasn't the kind of peace that brought comfort. Rachel found herself checking the baby monitor more often, lingering in the nursery longer than necessary, listening for something she couldn't quite name. She chalked it up to new mom paranoia. Still, there was an undercurrent of tension that made the walls feel too close, the shadows too long. Then came the night that changed everything. It was just past 2 a.m. when Rachel stirred awake, her body reacting before her mind fully caught up. Something had pulled her from sleep, not a cry, not a noise she could name, but something real enough to leave her breathless. She sat up in bed and listened. There it was again, a soft, deliberate clicking sound. Not from the wind or the windows, it was coming from upstairs, from Lily's room. She grabbed her robe and crossed the hallway on bare feet, her heart picking up speed. The monitor in the bedroom showed only static. Strange. The signal had never cut out before. Downstairs, Evan stirred as Moose's barks exploded into the quiet. The dog was slamming his body against the back porch door, snarling, barking with a kind of wild urgency Rachel had never heard before. It wasn't aggression, it was desperation. "Moose!" Evan shouted as he stumbled toward the door. The dog's claws scraped against the glass, and through the porch light, they could see him fixated on something inside the house, barking non-stop, tail rigid, ears alert. Rachel didn't wait. She rushed up the stairs and burst into the nursery. Lily was still in her crib, shifting restlessly, her face flushed in sleep. The nightlight flickered as if struggling to stay on. Rachel stepped forward, about to lift her daughter when she saw it. A long, thin scratch near the top rail of the crib. She froze. It was small, shallow, but unmistakable. Not the kind Moose would make. His claws were blunt from years of play and pavement. This was sharper, cleaner, and it wasn't the only one. Rachel's eyes scanned the floor and saw faint, curved marks along the baseboards, some near the heating vent, others tracing back to the far corner of the room, where the floor creaked more than anywhere else. Her breath caught in her throat. She remembered the sounds she had heard, those little scrapes in the night. The way Moose had always stared at the floorboards, how he had whined and barked and tried in his own way to be heard. What if he had been trying to warn them all along? "Rachel!" Evan called from downstairs. She heard him unlock the porch door, Moose bursting in with a bark that rattled the air. The dog didn't even pause. He bounded up the stairs, nearly knocking Evan aside, and ran straight to Lily's room. Rachel instinctively stepped in front of the crib. "Wait," she said softly, holding out a hand. But Moose didn't lunge. He didn't bark at Lily or at her. Instead, he padded slowly toward the corner of the room, nose to the ground. He sniffed, paused, then growled, low and guttural, at the floor. "Evan," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "Something's under there." He looked at her, confused. "Under the floor?" She nodded, her gaze still locked on the boards Moose had focused on. I think that's what he's been trying to tell us." They didn't sleep that night. Evan went into the basement with a flashlight while Rachel sat with Lily pressed to her chest, her heart pounding. Moose never left her side. When Evan returned, his face was pale. "There's damage under there," he said. "Something's dug out part of the crawl space. Could be raccoons, maybe a possum. I saw, I don't know, hair? Claw marks." Rachel's stomach churned. She glanced at the scratch on the crib rail again. That was inches from her head. It was the first time she truly let the fear settle into her bones. All this time she had seen Moose's behavior as a threat, his pacing, his growling, his relentless presence. But what if she had misread everything? Moose hadn't been acting out. He had been trying to protect. The guilt hit hard. Rachel reached down and ran her fingers through the fur between Moose's ears. He leaned into her touch without hesitation, eyes warm, steady. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Moose didn't respond. He didn't need to. He'd never left his post, not even when he was locked outside, shut out from the family he was trying to save. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, the house was still once more. But this time, it wasn't silence that settled over them. It was understanding. The night air carried a biting chill as a soft wind rustled through the aging shutters of the Dawson home. Inside, the lights were dimmed, the house wrapped in an artificial quiet that only sleep could bring. Lily had been fussy all afternoon. her tiny body warmer than usual, cheeks flushed with a faint, lingering pink. Rachel had taken her temperature twice. It was slightly elevated, nothing alarming, but enough to make her hold the baby longer, rock her slower, and linger at the crib side long after Lily's eyes had fluttered shut. She stood there for a moment longer, watching her daughter breathe in gentle, shallow rhythms. Then, reluctantly, she tucked the blanket around Lily's feet and tiptoed back to the bedroom. Moose was still on the back porch, sleeping in his crate, or so she thought. Downstairs, Evan was half asleep on the couch, a book lying forgotten on his chest. Rachel whispered that she was going to grab a cup of chamomile tea before bed, trying to calm the restlessness that had been gnawing at her since sunset. Something about the house still felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. Then it began, a violent clatter, metal against metal, wood scraping, a deep, guttural growl. Rachel froze mid-step in the kitchen. From the back porch, Moose erupted into a storm of barking, the kind that didn't stop, the kind that told you something was very, very wrong. Then came the sound of splintering wood and a sharp bang against the back door. Evan jumped off the couch. "What the hell?" he muttered, bolting toward the porch. But before he could reach the door, Moose had already found his way in. The crate had snapped at one of the joints, whether from age or sheer force they would never know. But Moose had squeezed free and charged through the screen, his nails skidding on the hardwood floor as he made a beeline for the stairs. "Moose!" Evan shouted, chasing after him. Rachel, halfway to the stairs herself, turned just in time to see Moose barrel past her, eyes wide, body tense with urgency. He ignored them both, barking, growling, his focus fixed. Rachel's stomach twisted. "The baby!" she gasped. Upstairs, the air had turned unnaturally still. As Rachel reached the nursery door, Moose leapt up, front paws striking the wood, claws raking at the handle. The barking rose into something almost frantic, primal. Evan caught up, reaching for Moose's collar. "Down, boy! You're scaring her!" But that's when they heard it. A scream. Not from Moose, not from Rachel, but from Lily. A high, shrill, terrified wail. Rachel's hands fumbled at the doorknob, throwing the door open. What she saw in the next second would remain etched in her memory forever. A creature, wild-eyed, matted, and snarling, had emerged from the crawlspace vent in the far corner of the nursery. A possum, but larger than any Rachel had seen before, its body tense, fur bristling, saliva frothing at its mouth. It had already climbed halfway up the crib rail. Lily was shrieking, and Moose was airborne. The dog lunged past Rachel and Evan, leaping straight into the nursery, teeth bared. He landed between the crib and the creature, letting out a roar that shook the air. The possum hissed, its tiny eyes gleaming red, and lunged. Moose didn't back down. The two collided in a blur of fur and teeth. Rachel screamed as the crib wobbled. Evan rushed in, grabbing Lily from the mattress just as the creature fell back to the floor, Moose snapping at its heels. In a final burst of energy, Moose drove the possum toward the corner of the room. The beast darted back into the vent with a shrill squeal, vanishing as quickly as it had come. Silence. Rachel collapsed onto the floor, clutching Lily to her chest. The baby's cries had turned into hiccuping sobs, her tiny fists tangled in Rachel's hair. Moose stood trembling in the center of the nursery, one paw lifted off the ground. A deep scratch along his shoulder oozed red, and a small patch of fur was missing from his leg. His sides heaved with exhaustion, yet his eyes never left Lily. Evan knelt beside him, gently checking the wound. "Good boy," he whispered. "You brave, stupid, wonderful boy." Rachel couldn't speak. Her hands were shaking, her face streaked with tears. All this time she had feared Moose, feared that he would harm the baby, feared that his growls were signs of dominance, not warning. But she had been wrong. So terribly, shamefully wrong. Moose had known. Moose had sensed the danger. Moose had waited, clawed, barked, and begged for them to listen. And when the moment came, he had faced it alone. He hadn't hesitated, not even for a second. Later, with Lily asleep again, this time in their bed, and Moose's wounds cleaned and bandaged, Rachel sat on the floor of the nursery, her back against the wall. She looked at the place where the possum had emerged, then at the crib, then finally at Moose, who lay curled up beside the door, guarding once more. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Moose blinked at her, then closed his eyes. He didn't need her apology. He had never needed anything. But tonight, she finally understood. The growling was never a threat. It was a promise. The sun rose slowly over Willow Creek, casting soft golden light through the frosted windows of the Dawson home. Inside, the house was quiet, but it was no longer the tense, uncertain silence that had haunted their nights. This was a silence born of exhaustion, of aftershock, of questions too big for morning light. Lily slept between her parents in their bed, nestled in Rachel's arms. She stirred softly, her breathing steady. Her fever had gone down. Her tiny fingers clutched at Rachel's shirt as if grounding herself after a nightmare. But the nightmare wasn't over, not for Rachel, not after what had happened, not after what she had almost missed. Evan stood by the back door, watching Moose limp gently across the living room floor. The makeshift bandage on his foreleg was already spotted with red. Yet the dog showed no signs of complaint. He moved with a quiet, watchful presence, his eyes always drifting back to the baby. "Moose," Evan murmured, kneeling to meet him eye to eye. "You knew, didn't you?" The dog didn't respond, of course, but Evan felt the weight of that unspoken truth settle deeper in his chest. There were no coincidences anymore, no exaggerations, no paranoia. There had been a threat all along, and Moose had been the only one listening. Later that morning, the crawlspace inspector arrived, a short, burly man named Frank who spoke with a slow drawl and eyes that didn't miss a thing. He was already frowning as he stepped out of his truck. "Your call said something came out from under the nursery floor?" Frank asked. Evan nodded grimly. "A possum. Big. Sick, maybe. It attacked our daughter's crib." Frank arched a brow. "That's rare. They're shy creatures unless they're starving or rabid." Rachel flinched at the word. Frank climbed under the house with a flashlight and a camera, leaving behind a trail of disturbed leaves and dust. The minutes passed slowly. Rachel stood barefoot in the kitchen, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Evan paced. Moose sat by the stairs, eyes never leaving the nursery door. When Frank emerged half an hour later, his expression was tight. "You've got a problem," he said flatly. "More than one, actually." He showed them the photos: burrows, claw marks, shredded insulation, feces, and in one disturbing shot, a nest. Inside it, scraps of old fabric, paper, even what looked like a chewed-up baby sock. But what made Rachel's stomach lurch was the sight of tiny eyes peeking out from the shadows. More possums. "At least 3, Frank said. Maybe more." "And one of them's sick," Frank confirmed. "Could be distemper or rabies. Hard to say without trapping and testing, but the one you described sounds off. Too bold, too aggressive." He looked at Rachel and Evan with a gravity that made her knees weaken. "You're lucky," he said. "Real lucky. If your dog hadn't stepped in when he did, that thing could have really hurt your little one." Rachel didn't respond. She couldn't. Her throat had closed up, her heart hammering. It wasn't a hypothetical anymore. It was fact. Moose had saved Lily's life. Evan opened the laptop that evening, pulling up the footage from the previous week. He hadn't been ready to face it before. Now he needed to see. Needed to understand. Rachel sat beside him, arms around her knees. The video from 4 nights earlier played in muted blue tones. Lily sleeping. The nightlight casting soft shapes on the wall. Then Moose appeared on screen, stepping carefully into the nursery, his eyes darting toward the floor. He sniffed around the vent, then sat rigid, ears straight, tail motionless. And then he growled. Not a threat, not directed at anyone, just a low, steady vibration of warning. He did it again the next night, and the next. Sometimes he paced, circling the crib. Sometimes he barked once, sharply, as if to wake someone up. But he never tried to hurt anyone, never even touched the baby. He had been watching, guarding, trying to speak in the only language he knew. Rachel pressed a trembling hand to her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. She had seen those moments in real time, and she had dismissed them. Worse, she had punished him for them. She had locked him out, banished him when all he had wanted was to protect them. Evan placed a hand on her back. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She stood slowly and walked toward the nursery, now empty for the night. The crib was still there, and the scratch marks were still visible, ugly reminders of what had almost happened. Moose followed at a distance, his steps uneven but steady. Rachel turned to him, kneeling down, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You were trying to tell me. You knew she wasn't safe, and I wouldn't listen." Moose lowered his head, gently nuzzling her shoulder. That was the moment Rachel finally let go of the fear. The fear of the past, the fear of the breed, the fear that had blinded her from seeing what was right in front of her all along. Moose wasn't a threat. He was their protector, their silent, loyal guardian. And he had never stopped trying. That night, Moose slept curled beside Lily's crib again. This time, invited, welcomed, trusted. Rachel left the door open. She didn't check the camera. She didn't need to. For the first time since they'd moved into that house, she slept without fear. Because now she understood what Moose had been saying all along. There's something wrong, and I won't let it hurt her. In the days that followed, Rachel found herself seeing the world through a different lens. Everything looked the same. The pale morning light through the nursery curtains, the creaky floorboards, the faint whistle of the wind outside. But it all felt changed. Or perhaps she was the one who had changed. She watched Moose closely now, not with suspicion, but with quiet awe. Gone was the wariness in her posture, the instinct to shield Lily whenever Moose drew near. In its place was a slow, blooming trust, tentative at first, then rooted deeper with every passing day. He didn't ask for it. He didn't expect it. He simply accepted it, as he always had, with calm eyes and a gentle heart. Moose's injury was minor, but Rachel treated it like something sacred. Each time she unwrapped the bandage and cleaned the wound, she spoke to him softly, whispering things she hadn't found the strength to say aloud before. "Thank you," she'd murmur, dabbing antiseptic gently on the scratch above his paw. "I didn't see you clearly before, but I do now." And Moose would sit still, patient as ever, his eyes occasionally drifting to Lily playing quietly on the nursery rug. Rachel allowed him back inside without hesitation, not just into the house, but into the center of their family. He lay curled at Lily's feet as she learned to grasp toys and roll onto her belly. He followed Rachel as she moved from room to room, not out of anxiety, but as if to say, "I'm still here. I always will be." At night, he lay beside the crib again, this time on a plush dog bed Rachel had picked out herself. She tucked a fleece blanket over him when the air turned cool, and she never closed the door. More than once, she woke in the night to see him sitting alert beside Lily, his ears perked at some distant creak, his expression steady and composed. She didn't fear it anymore. She welcomed it. The shift in her heart wasn't sudden, but it was absolute. One quiet morning, Rachel sat on the nursery floor with Lily in her lap. The baby gurgled happily, reaching for a rattle. Moose lay nearby, watching the pair with warm, steady eyes. Rachel glanced at him, then looked down at her daughter, whose tiny hand clutched one of Moose's back paws like it was a security blanket. "He never let go of you," Rachel whispered, "even when I did." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep and Evan had gone to bed early, Rachel opened her laptop and stared at the blinking cursor on a blank screen. The house was still. Moose lay at her feet. She took a breath and began to type. She started at the beginning. The move to Willow Creek, the new life they had hoped to build, the fear she hadn't expected to feel. She didn't try to justify her choices. She didn't sugarcoat her reactions. Instead, she laid them bare. "I misjudged him," she wrote. "I saw a stereotype instead of a soul. I let fear speak louder than instinct, and because of that, I almost lost something I can't replace." She told the story from her point of view, the tension, the misunderstandings, the growls she took as threats. Then she described the night Moose saved her daughter's life, the scratch marks on the crib, the nest beneath the house, the sick animal that had crawled into their world from below. And she wrote about the quiet hero who had tried to warn them. "He didn't bark to scare us. He barked to protect us. He didn't pace out of anxiety. He stood guard because he sensed danger before we could see it." She posted it anonymously at first, on a community blog dedicated to rescue dogs. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few comments, a handful of readers. By the next morning, the post had been shared hundreds of times. A few days later, thousands. Messages poured in, some from dog lovers, others from parents who admitted they too had felt afraid of certain breeds. Some shared their own stories of misunderstood pets. Others just thanked her for being honest. Not all the responses were kind. Some accused her of overreacting, of creating drama, of only changing her tune because things had worked out. But Rachel didn't respond to those. Because this wasn't about changing public opinion. It was about something else. Redemption. Moose never read the post, of course. He didn't need to see the words. He didn't need a grand gesture or a tearful apology. His forgiveness was already given. He offered it freely every time he lay beside the crib, every time he nuzzled Lily's blanket, every time he looked up at Rachel with eyes that held no blame, only loyalty. And Rachel understood, deeply now, that some apologies didn't need to be spoken. Some were made through action, through change, through quiet presence and open hearts. She started learning more about pit bulls, not from news headlines or old cautionary tales, but from real sources. Trainers, rescue groups, families like hers. She discovered how misunderstood the breed had become, how much damage fear could do when it clouded empathy. She reached out to a local dog trainer, not because Moose needed fixing, but because she wanted to understand him better. They worked together weekly, mostly basic commands, but more than that, it became about communication, a new language between them. She even began volunteering part-time at the animal shelter Evan used to help at. On her first day, she found herself gravitating toward the large breeds, the ones with blocky heads and cautious eyes. She knelt beside one crate and whispered, "You're not scary, just waiting for someone to see you." And Moose remained as he always had been. Loyal, quiet, present. One evening, Rachel watched Lily fall asleep with Moose resting gently beside her crib. The baby's hand dangled over the edge, barely brushing Moose's back. Rachel sat beside them on the floor, leaning back against the wall, her heart full. There were no more shadows in her mind, no more questions, only clarity. Some guardians didn't wear badges or capes. Some didn't speak with words. Some just stood between you and the darkness, even when you told them to leave. The seasons shifted gently in Willow Creek. Summer faded into golden autumn, and then into a winter softened by holiday lights and laughter. Inside the Dawson home, warmth no longer came just from the fireplace or the thick woolen throws, but from something deeper, something lived in and real. The kind of warmth born from trials, redemption, and the unexpected bond between a child and her dog. Moose had become a fixture in their lives and, in every sense of the word, family. He and Lily were nearly inseparable. Wherever she went, he followed, not because he was asked to, but because he wanted to. The bond between them grew naturally, like ivy clinging to old brick, strong and beautiful in its quiet persistence. As Lily learned to crawl, Moose was always beside her, careful to move slowly so she could keep up. When she took her first unsteady steps, it was Moose's back she reached for. And when she fell, it was Moose who licked away her tears. Rachel often found herself watching them in quiet moments, Lily's little fingers buried in Moose's fur, Moose gazing at her with the patient calm of someone who had already sworn to protect. There was no hesitation in Rachel anymore, not even a flicker of doubt, just gratitude. Deep, anchoring gratitude. Around the house there were photos, dozens of them. On the mantel, in frames lining the hallway, clipped to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. And in almost every single one, Moose was there, lying beside the crib, sitting in the backyard with Lily's tiny arms looped around his neck, curled up at the foot of the bed while Lily read picture books aloud, not knowing or caring whether he understood. He was always there. Rachel, who had once felt a cold fear every time she heard Moose's claws click across the floor, now couldn't imagine her life without that sound. It had become one of the many quiet rhythms of their home, the heartbeat beneath the walls. But her transformation didn't end within the four walls of their house. Rachel began speaking at community events, volunteering at shelters and attending dog training seminars, not as a fearful skeptic, but as a passionate advocate. At first, she felt nervous telling their story, but every time she spoke Moose's name into a microphone, her voice grew steadier. "It wasn't his appearance I should have feared," she told a group of first-time dog adopters one evening. "It was my own assumptions. I saw danger where there was only love, and that almost cost us everything." She spoke at schools and local pet expos, sharing Lily and Moose's journey. Sometimes, she brought Moose along. He would sit calmly by her side, tail wagging gently, tongue lolling in the warm room. Children would gather around to pet him. Parents would ask questions. Many admitted that they too had hesitated when it came to breeds like his. And Rachel always told them the same thing. Don't judge a dog by its breed, judge by its heart. Moose became a quiet symbol in their small town. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid him now stopped to say hello. Some asked for advice when looking to adopt. One family even named their new rescue Rusty, a subtle nod to the quiet hero next door. For Evan, it was watching Rachel grow that moved him most. He had always known the truth about Moose, but seeing his wife step into that truth, embrace it fully, and become an advocate for it, that was something special, something he would never forget. And Lily? Well, to her, Moose wasn't a hero or a symbol. He was simply Moose, her best friend, her protector, her pillow when she was tired and her playmate when she was energized. She didn't remember the fear, the conflict, or the danger. All she knew was love, and that was more than enough. One night, months after the attack, the house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet now. The nursery glowed softly with a nightlight shaped like a moon. Lily had fallen asleep moments ago, her breathing even, her hand still resting on the edge of the crib. Moose lay beneath her, as he always did. His head rested on his paws, his ears flicking at the occasional night sound. His body still. His eyes half closed. Rachel stood in the doorway, arms folded gently across her chest. Evan stepped up beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. They stood together for a long moment, watching their daughter sleep, watching Moose guard. Neither of them said a word for a while. Then Evan leaned closer and whispered, "You see it now, don't you?" He always knew. Long before we did. Rachel smiled. a soft tear rolling down her cheek, not from sadness, but from something sweeter, a release, a peace she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. She nodded. "He was never the danger," she whispered back. "He was the warning." They stayed there for a while, wrapped in the hush of the moment, the safety of the room, and the unshakable trust that had finally taken root. And down by the crib, Moose slept on, still listening, still guarding, still loving in the only way he knew how. As the light fades on the Dawson family's journey, we're left with more than just a heartwarming ending. We're left with truth. Moose was never the danger. He was the warning, the quiet guardian, the misunderstood hero. As the saying goes, what you see isn't always what you get. On Veil Marks, we tell stories like this because they matter. If this touched you, if it made you feel, think, or cry, please like, subscribe, and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. It means more than you know. Your support helps us create more meaningful, high-quality stories that heal, inspire, and spark real conversation. And remember, sometimes the bravest love is the one that waits quietly at the door.